My name is Ryan Earnhardt from CreativeSoundLab.tv, where audio recording is an art form. And today's episode is about placement of a microphone over a drum kit. Now this may sound really basic, but I have 5 really cool examples of just slight tweaks of the placement of one single ribbon mic that really yields a big difference in the sound. And one of the biggest and coolest differences is the sound of the cymbals. The sound of the ride cymbal actually changes. Sounds like the pitch kind of goes up and gets brighter, or you can tame maybe a cheap sounding cymbal that's kind of clangy. You can tame that down and subdue the more offensive parts of that cymbal. Or you can actually tame the sound of the hi-hats. You can actually lessen the volume of the hi-hats by where and how you're placing the mic over the kit. Now, for today, I do have a free PDF guide on how to tame the hi-hats. It goes a little bit more into depth on ways you can modify the hi-hat and other techniques to keep the hi-hat from just roaring into overheads and your snare mics. So you can click and download that within seconds if you're interested and you have this issue. A lot of engineers really always experience that issue of just a really loud hi-hat. So I have 5 examples, and then I also have some examples covering how the preamps that I'm using today are also flavoring the sound of the overhead. Now, for the positioning, we're using one overhead, and just as a technique of listening and critical listening, we're listening to just one microphone. And I'll be guiding you of how to listen, what to listen for. But you can actually use this for stereo configurations. In the same position, you can be putting an XY, for example, or you can put a bloom line by using 2 ribbon microphones. So you can use this in stereo, but for today we're listening to one microphone and we're just listening critically to how it's picking up the drum kit. Let's get started. Now the first position is over the ride cymbal pointed at the snare. This is very similar to the weather vane technique where we started off with the mono ribbon over the ride pointing to the snare. This should give us some really interesting effects. For these examples today, we're listening to a Rode NTR ribbon mic going into a Warm Audio TB12. Now, the biggest advantage to this position is to tame a really clangy or budget ride cymbal. So if you have a cymbal that's very clangy, very kind of loud in the 3K range, it can kind of sound a bit scooped sounding in the upper mids. It also has a really nice stick sound, so you actually hear the wood hitting the metal. It's a little bit different than other positions, and just notice as we switch positions how that ride cymbal will change. The sound of the ride will change based on the angle of the ride out to the position of that microphone. This is really just a classic position, great for starting any sort of setup, asymmetrical setup, but it's really not great if you have a really loud hi-hat because it's just going to reinforce that hi-hat. The next position is over the drummer's head. Now, this makes an interesting sound for the ride cymbal. It has some really interesting high end going on there. The snare does have a little bit more fuller and fatter sound, and I believe that it's because the mic is actually looking out into the room a little bit, out in front of the drum set and picking up some of the room sound. The hi-hat, I believe, is a pretty good balance in this position, and I believe this is caused because the drummer is actually blocking the hi-hat directly from going into that mic. So I think this hi-hat has been tamed a little bit because the drummer's body is blocking the sound of the hi-hat going directly into the mic. And here's a little demo to either prove or disprove this little theory. I'm just trying to replicate the results, what I think might be happening here. Let's check it out. Yeah, so I think just making sure that the mic is off to the drummer's right shoulder instead of right above his head could actually help to block the hi-hat going directly into that mic. The next position is over the floor tom pointed at the snare, so the mic is angled in to look directly at the snare drum. Definitely the ride is the loudest. The hi-hat actually kind of sounds loud, and this could be that, out to the sides of cymbals, they do tend to brighten up. The snare also has less full of a sound. I've also noticed that the snare does sound a little phasey here. It's not quite as full as if the mic were directly above that snare drum. And I guess you could say, in theory, sound coming off the top meets the sound coming off the bottom, and it kind of cancels out in the middle. I don't know that's completely true, but that's what my ears are kind of telling me here. And in general, I've noticed time and time again, the snare is fuller right above the drum. So this last position was just for fun. I lowered the microphone right above the snare drum and then angled it slightly to hopefully null out some of that hi-hat. I can't angle it too much, but I'm just trying to point it just a little bit away from that hi-hat. Obviously the snare is noticeably loud. The high tom is noticeably more loud, and the hi-hat is actually somewhat well balanced. So I was actually quite surprised at how this sounded with the hi-hat, but I still think the high tom is a bit loud. So the mic pre's that we've been listening to are the Warm Audio TV12. And what I'd like to do is show you a couple examples of how it's affecting the sound. In this example, the TV12 is emulating the flavors of an API preamp. This is also the same flavors as the Warm Audio WA12. Those settings are the X731 op amp, the vintage caps, and the steel transformer. In this example, the TB12 is dialed in for settings that have a more clean sound. Now, just in case the difference wasn't enough for you to hear clearly, I'm going to go ahead and push this preamp to its max. I'm going to put it back to the more flavorful setting and really push it. It'll be the X731 op amp, the vintage caps, steel transformer, the tone button will be pushed in to give us some gain, and I'm also going to be ramping it up quite a bit, and then attenuating before its output. This should give us some kind of flat peaks on the snare, but it'll give us a lot of flavor. Okay, now what I'm going to do is go ahead and clean this thing up. So the TB12 can actually take out the transformer entirely. So I'll take out the transformer and I'll go to the clean caps and the X18 op amp. I'll also only be using the gain that I need, so I won't be attenuating any of the gain. There's no ramping up or overdriving going on here. This is as clean as the TB12 can get. So one thing I just noticed is just how it kind of glues together with the flavors. There's some limitation of frequency in the more flavorful tones, whereas you clean it up, you really get a lot of kind of expansiveness of tones. The high end kind of opens up, and even the low end gets a little bit deeper. Okay, so I was really surprised with actually how well that worked, how it kind of shapes various elements of the kit. Now, if you want to get the free PDF guide, feel free to pick that up. You can download it within seconds of clicking. I'll see you next video.